Welcome to the Indiana History Project. I'm your host, Brian Hawkins, and we've got a couple of shows for you this month. It's been a while since we've been on. Recently, we had Dan Bortner on to talk about Spring Mill State Park, and we've got another treat for you today. Now, for those of you who watched the last show, even if you're watching this ages and ages hence, I was a bit under the weather, so thank you all for, I'm sure you were thinking about me this last week. And I will tell you that I'm feeling much better, although it hasn't quite got its claws out of me yet. I'm still just a little bit, so if I sound a little bit stopped up or have a little bit of a cough, I'm just on the recovery end, but I do feel pretty well. So if you were thinking about me this week, I appreciate it. So today we have a nice treat. We have a Bedford resident, Bob Kern. Bob,
Hello.
Thanks for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's no problem. We've been talking about getting you on for a while, but we've waited for a very good reason, so we'll talk about that in a minute. How long have you lived in Bedford, Bob?
Moved here in 1988 when I got out of the Army.
1988? So
Yes.
What brought you here?
I was offered a position running Stonehenge right before I got out of the service.
And you did that for a few years, correct?
Yeah, I did that until 2001.
Okay, so 88. Now, was the 88 when it opened? Were you there right at the beginning, or
It had been open about 9 months, and then I came in.
Okay, so you pretty much had the first stage of its life, and I know it was kind of a big deal. I was a kid when that opened, and it was kind of a big deal to have a big hotel, nice hotel on the highway that we could have.
And banquet
banquets
facilities.
and
That
banquet
was the big
facilities.
draw.
Yeah, it was.
Bedford needed it badly when they built Stonehenge.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, it was nice. So, did you enjoy that work?
I loved it.
Had you had any experience in that kind of industry before?
When I was in the Army, the owner had seen me a couple times, and I had won some awards, and he was just impressed with my leadership and offered me the job when I got out. So it was,
okay.
Yeah, he had a property in Shelbyville, and I spent 2 weeks there shadowing the staff and learning the ropes, and that was how I learned to be a hotel manager, thrown to the fire.
Good. We're going to talk about your past a lot today. We're going to talk about those military days, but I want to talk a little bit more about the present before we kind of go into the past. Off camera, your lovely wife is here, so you've got some family in the area. Tell us a little bit about your family. Who's who and doing what and.
Moved to Bedford and married a Bedford girl, and so that's
right. Bedford girls.
What's kept me here, and we've raised 5 kids between us, and now we're raising 3 grandchildren. 1 is in Bolivia right now. You
got
had
rid
Sage,
of her, didn't you? Yeah,
as her senior year. The other's a sophomore, Jade, and then the youngest, Harmony, is 10 years old at Parkview Intermediate.
Okay, so they're coming along.
Yes, they are.
Coming along, and the other one will be back with you before too long.
Yes, she comes back in June.
She's a little over halfway done, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So still a few
just
months
in
down
time
there,
for college. So
she seems like she's enjoying herself.
Too much.
Too much.
But
well,
that's part of it.
That's part of it, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Part of it. So after the Stonehenge days ended, what did you find yourself doing the last 15 years or so?
I guess it has been 15 years.
It's been a while.
I had my own business for a while, and
what was that?
Kern Paper.
Okay, a lot of people probably remember that.
Yeah, it was on the square.
On the square.
And it's now the 12 Days of Christmas.
Yep, what a great building. I love that building.
I got back into hotel management for a few years in Bloomington and remembered why I gotten out of hotel management. And then spent a lot of time just raising the grandkids. Okay. After that, I've had some health issues that have kept me from really working.
But you've been pretty busy.
Very busy.
The last couple of years, and that's really what we're here to talk about today.
Yes, sir.
You've written a couple of books, and let's go ahead and look at this first. We may show this again down the road, but this is Bob's first book, and I think we're going to flash this up on the monitor to get a better look. And there may even be another cover because he's updated that cover, and you can see a nice picture on the back, and there's Bob.
Yeah.
All right. So the title of this book is We Were Soldiers Too, and the subtitle is Serving as a Reagan Soldier During the Cold War. What inspired you to set out writing a book? I mean, I don't know. I can't imagine that when you were 12 years old thinking about what you were going to do someday that, writing books was at the top of your list. Maybe it was. So what made you wake up one day and say, I need to write a book?
Well,
today.
and actually, I wasn't at 12, but it was about at 16
Well, good.
when I got an interest in reading and had always wanted to write. I'd even purchased a few books on how to write a book, never read them, but it had always been something I wanted to do. And then 9/11 happened, and it changed a lot of things. It brought the country together, and we all know about how it brought back patriotism, and it also brought back a lot of people that were congratulatory and very considerate towards our military. They hadn't really thought about our soldiers until we got involved in the war on terror. And I had never fought in combat, and it was really difficult when someone would congratulate me or thank me for my service. And for a while, I actually would say, "I'm sorry I didn't serve during combat. I'm a Reagan soldier," which is one of the reasons I came up with that title. But I felt a lot of guilt and a lot of shame when people would thank me for my service. And then I realized it's really an issue in my head, because their gratitude was sincere. They didn't care when I served. They were it was just very sincere, and it was something I needed to deal with. And I realized there were probably a lot of guys that served with me and during those years that felt that same guilt, being a peacetime veteran during a combat or a wartime era. And so I thought, you know what, I've always wanted to write. I'm going to write about my service. This is a perfect thing, perfect time to put it down. And I also thought, maybe at some point my kids and grandkids would read it and think their papa had done something good during his life.
How long did it take? You said after 9/11, you started feeling,
Yeah.
you said shame, maybe some embarrassment over people, wishing you happy Veterans Day or having to stand up at those events. How long did it take you to come to terms with that? You said you realized at a certain point there was nothing to be ashamed about, that you still served your country, and that you should be proud of it. Was that, from 2001?
It's still there. Just this past Christmas, our pastor asked a few of us veterans to be the candle lighters for our candlelight vigil on Christmas Eve, and they recognized us at church, and that shame reared its ugly head. And
were the other guys chosen in a similar situation, or were they younger guys?
No, there were two that were currently on active duty. There were a couple that were combat vets, and then there was just, I think, me and one other guy were peacetime vets. And I don't think the pastor picked them at random. He actually had a church member do it, but it's still there. Veterans Day, when I'm asked to stand up, I'm still hesitant. And it takes an elbow from the wife sometimes to get me up, and
that's why she's here today, in case you need
in case I need an elbow.
Right.
So it's there. I know it's in my head, and I'm getting better at it.
Did you feel this from the time? Remind me again, when did you finish your military service? What year was it?
I got out in March of 1980. January of '88 is when I left. March was my end of service time.
So 88 to 2001, that time you were at Stonehenge between the end of your service and 9/11, did you feel the same way, or was it really with 9/11 and knowing that soldiers were going back into combat that you started feeling like there was a tension between your service and...
It was 9/11 by far, because...
So through the 90s, you didn't necessarily feel that same
No,
feeling.
the first war in Iraq happened, 18, 20 months after I got out. Right. And there was a little bit of guilt then because I was injured. And one of the reasons I got out is had leg problems, and you can't be in the infantry if your legs aren't working right. And so there was some guilt about not being able to go back and join up when the first war in Iraq. But 9/11 is when people were just really thanking veterans everywhere, and that's.
And I'm sure that during Desert Storm, it was so fast and over too that there wasn't as much time to be guilty about it. I mean, we were in and out, and it was, certainly we lost some lives. We lost a local fella from here, and so it wasn't. We can't take that lightly. But at the same time, relative to Vietnam and World War II and Korea, and even since 9/11, that was a pretty quick in and out. We were through it, and probably not as much time to dwell on the fact that.
Well, and it didn't stir up that nationalism or that patriotism like 9/11 did because it was so fast. I mean, we didn't even know we were over there
and we weren't
until we were doing
directly attacked as we were in 9/11.
Right.
So that certainly makes
9/11's when the flags popped up on everybody's porch, and you know, at least
Lee Greenwood made a ton of money again, and
yeah. And the Star Spangled Banner ever since 9/11 it chokes me up as it does most veterans, but nothing. 9/11's what triggered all of the patriotism and all of the. It just everything happened then.
So the books, in a certain way, are your kind of an effort to catharsis, to purge some of those demons a little bit. To say, my experience wasn't the same, but it was valuable.
Yeah.
And one thing that's interesting too, and I think the books deal with this to a great degree, that you were a peacetime soldier, but peacetime from the end of World War II to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of communism was kind of only peace in name.
Yes.
I mean, it was peacetime. We weren't, for most of that time, we weren't in active hot wars, although we were over in a couple of different situations. Korea, obviously, Vietnam another really significant one. You come along a little after that. You probably couldn't have held the gun up during the Vietnam War. You'd have been a little too small for that. But really, peacetime is a relative term, and we're going to spend some time today talking about what it meant to be a peacetime soldier in Germany during this period. But let's go back a little bit first, because we've got plenty of that to deal with. You've been in Bedford since '88, but where are you from? Where did you grow up? And
I was born in Newcastle, Indiana, so I am a Hoosier boy. We moved a couple of times with my mom's work. I ended up in Yorktown for middle school years, and then I graduated from high school in Alexandria. I graduated as a junior, so I was young, and I ended up graduating in May, enlisting.
And when was this? What year?
May of 1980. And I enlisted, I actually visited the recruiter and was sold on the Army in April of that 1980. And I was off in basic training in November that year. So it was a pretty quick, not something I thought about or always wanted to do.
So it wasn't something when you were a little kid that you thought, I've got to be in the military, I'm going to be a soldier someday?
No.
So what took you there?
When I graduated, I had a real close friend in Don and Paul Copley when I was in high school, and in fact, I spent a lot of weekends staying with the two of them in their house, and Don joined the service, and Paul and I went to visit him at basic training, and we went to see him graduate from basic, and we did the same at AIT, and just seeing how proud he was of being in the military, and he built it up pretty good with me too. That I just decided that's what I wanted to do. My original plan was like anyone else, is to take a year off from high school or from college.
Sure.
I graduated early. I had the best excuse in the world to take a year off, and that changed as soon as I saw how proud Donnie was of his service, and he took me to the recruiter, and it moved pretty quickly from that.
So what was the first step? Where did they send you, and what was your experience?
First step was in Muncie. We went and talked with the recruiter, and he scheduled me to come back that Saturday and they have some placement tests to figure out supposedly where your strengths and weaknesses are. But in fact, back then they would use that to fill some of the high priority stuff, but most of you got shifted to the infantry, to the combat arms areas. And then once they took the test that day, I made the commitment to be an 11 Hotel anti-armor guy, and had to have my mom come in on a follow-up to sign for me because I was just 17 years old. And then from there, I went to the Indianapolis AAFES and did the physical and was sworn in. This would have been in October of 1980, and I was on the extended entry program until I actually left November 24th for Fort Jackson, and then basic training at Fort Benning.
So basic training, I've heard horror stories. Kids today, it makes me feel so old to say that. Kids today, but they come. A lot of our kids go to the military, and they come back, and I say, "How was it?" And they all say, it wasn't that bad." Now I know that we don't have video of them crying themselves to sleep at night when they're exhausted and tired, and I'm sure they probably have a few of those nights. But they seem to say, I expected it to be rough. It was rough, but it wasn't too bad. What was your basic training experience? Was it?
It was just,
Obviously wasn't more than you could handle because you survived it.
yeah, but it was
Close.
pure terror.
Yeah.
You live in back then we lived in a state of fear, because next to God, the drill sergeants were the most important person in your life, and your world evolved around their moods. And
I'm sure they didn't want you to forget it. Ever.
No, and we didn't sleep much, and it was all about getting us physically trained. And I later learned in one of my management classes that there are the two types of managers in one theory, Theory X and Theory Y. And Theory X is where they want you to do what you're told, you don't question it. And they taught us in that, and I learned this after the military, that the only place that's an effective management style is the military. That when you're told you need to charge that hill, Private Kern, they want you to do it without question because you don't have time to be arguing back and forth. That hill needs charged now.
Right.
And so basic training is where they break you down and turn you into that follower where you know the person above you is your boss. And anyway, that's...
Sure, yeah, the real world doesn't, those of us that haven't served in the military, we don't always like to be told,
No.
do this. But I would think even after military service, we probably revert to that to some degree, as we know that working in the office or in the hotel or whatever it is, that you don't have to talk to me like that. We can collaborate on this. We can figure it out together. I don't have to be told to rush that hill because nobody's got guns over there firing at us. We can figure this out together. But in those combat situations, you don't necessarily have time to sit down and talk about how you feel about it.
And I'm sure it's still the same. I don't think it's quite as physical as it used to be. I know it's not as abusive because everybody has a cell phone now, and the drill sergeant says there's no way they could get away with some of the things they said or did.
Viral videos put it into that.
But peacetime or not, the whole objective of basic training is to prepare you for combat, and to be prepared, you have to be a follower. And they made us followers.
That's what they make you, yeah. So how long does basic training last for you?
12 weeks.
12 weeks.
For combat infantry.
You finish up there and probably feel like you're in the best shape you've ever been in your life.
Yeah.
And ready to go. Did you have any ideas when you went in, to literally at 17 years old, graduating high school, signing up, going to basic? Were you thinking about the next step? I want to do this next, or was it more like a leap into the chasm where I'm going to land somewhere and it'll be okay?
It was definitely a leap. Like I said, it happened so fast I didn't even know anything about the Army. In fact, I talk about how when I first signed up and made the commitment, I was going to be a heavy anti-armor crewman. I thought that was the coolest title in the world, and I went home and bragged about it and told everybody at school that I was going to be a heavy anti-armor crewman, and I wasn't scared of combat because I was going to be behind some heavy armor and I was going to be safe. And to show how naive I was, Donnie called about 2 weeks after I had enlisted to find out what job I had taken, and I told him I was going to be a heavy anti-armor crewman, and he said, "I'm not sure what that is. What's your MOS?" And I told him 11 Hotel, and he said, "You're going to be a grunt." And my heart sunk, because anything that's called a grunt can't be good. No.
Did you ever have occasion after you had a little more, wised up a little bit about the whole thing, to have some young kid who you knew your family or friends from high school call you and go, "Oh, I'm excited about this job," and you got to say, "Listen, kid, you're a grunt."
Yeah, no, I never got.
You didn't get a
table never turned on me.
That's too bad.
So
that's too bad. Well, so So you signed up and knew you were headed to basic and knew it was going to be tough.
Yeah.
But weren't really thinking much beyond that as far as where you were going to be assigned or, I mean, you knew you weren't going to combat.
Yeah.
That's the one thing you would have known at that point. But you didn't
I
really think about
I
much else.
did pick Germany. Germany was my only stipulation.
Okay, so you picked Germany.
I did. I was very adamant that I don't care as long as I end up in Germany.
So what were your reasons for wanting to go to Germany? Were there any of them patriotic at all, or did they have to do with?
Well, Germany's Europe. It's another country,
Germany's
and
Europe,
I
yeah.
thought it was centrally located in Europe, so I could see the world on Uncle Sam's dime. And I didn't think that one through either because Germany was also right next to the Iron Curtain, and the Soviet forces were just next door. And
so you go west or north or south, but not much
east.
Yeah.
And by proximity, I didn't realize how hard it was going to be, or why I was going to be in Germany that close to them. I just thought it was the ticket to, the gate to Europe.
Yeah. So were you 18 by the time you got to Europe, or were you still 17?
I turned 18 in Germany.
In Germany,
Yeah.
okay. Tell us a little bit. What was your experience? You're done with basic, and then is it off to Germany immediately?
Yeah.
Pretty much?
I finished basic. We had a ceremony that morning, and I sat in the barracks, got my orders, and about 10 o'clock that night, they put me on a bus and sent me to the airport, and I landed.
What were your impressions when you landed? I mean, what do you remember those initial feelings being, or thoughts or experiences?
It was a long flight, so I got there and I was pretty tired, and they shipped me out directly to the what they call the Head Start program. You end up at the replacement center where you immediately at the airport get orders to the Bootsbach, Germany's where I went for the Head Start program, and it's a 2-week course to acclimate you towards being stationed in Germany, so that you can learn some basic languages, some of the culture, learn the road signs because you're going to be actually driving and operating on their roads in your vehicles. And so it's a crash course in it, but it was a 9-to-5 crash course. So there was a lot of free time at night. And so this 17-year-old boy was cut loose at night in a country that there was no drinking age requirements. And
Now, I'm sure you didn't take advantage of that at all.
I took every opportunity I could.
And probably, I'm sure we're not alone as far as American soldiers.
At first, it was just cool. You could walk into a bar and you could drink, and I did. And
does that wear off after a little while? Or did it never really lose its thrill? Because you would have really been young your entire stay in Germany.
Yeah, in Germany, the lifestyle at that point in history was so demanding. We all drank, and so it lost its zeal. You drank for a different reason. At first, it was because I'm a 17-year-old. This is cool, and I'm hanging out in a German bar. I'm shooting pool, and I can drink all the beer I want and whiskey. Or after that, it just became that's just what you did. You spent all your time out, wearing yourself out, and training for about a war with the Soviets. That when you did have time off, you popped open the beer, and that's the lifestyle over there. And yes, you do reach your limit because when I left Germany, I pretty much stopped. I'd had all my drinking, and I'd had enough. In fact, I've talked to a lot of guys that just quit when they left because they had
Sure, absolutely.
It's a tough lifestyle.
So tell us, I mean, you say you drank for a different reason. It wasn't just to be young and carefree. I mean, you had a pretty serious job while you were there, and it was demanding. I had always had in my head this image of, basic training being really tough. I may have told you this before.
Yeah.
Basic training being really tough, and then everything after that was like Sergeant Bilko,
Yeah, that's what you
right?
said.
Where you play, you play
poker
poker at the motor pool.
Yeah.
And if they're going to make you march a little bit, you can go do that and fake it or whatever. But obviously, reading your books, the training, the conditioning, not only doesn't let up. In some cases, it gets harder because you're now exposed to 4 seasons of training.
Yeah.
So the heat of the summer, the coldest parts of the winter, while some of the intensity of basic where you're training all the time may go away a little bit, they're certainly still making you march. You're qualifying for different jobs or duties or achievement levels. It doesn't go away just because you're assigned to a job.
No, and that was the lifestyle. I think I wrote about it. I mentioned this quite a few times in the book, is you prepare for the training, you train, you recover from the training, you get a pass, and then you start it. It's a very cyclic lifestyle in Germany back then. And the threat was real, and so we had to be ready for it. And people don't realize that there was we forget there was an arms race.
Yeah.
We forget that nuclear weapons, we wanted to have the most. It was called a deterrent policy. If we have more nuclear weapons than you won't want to use yours against us. Right. And but it was a real threat, and we were the guys that were right there. We were the stopgap.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I definitely learned a lot reading these 2 books. I'm 39, so I'm in an age where I remember the Eastern Bloc falling apart. I was about in middle school when it all kind of came down, and the Soviet Union started to break up and become independent states, and Eastern Europe started getting freedom. So I remember a time before that, but it wasn't those late 80s. Things weren't quite as intense. We were moving towards the point where they were going to fall apart. We were winning. We knew we were winning. There was still tension. We still hated the Russians. Whether we didn't really hate them at that point. I don't think we did at that point. I think at that point, people of my generation just felt like we had won or we were winning. Yeah. But we didn't see Vietnam. We didn't see the years after World War II. And so in reading the book, you really get a sense of just how soldiers who were stationed in Germany at this time became aware that if this thing blows up, if the Soviets come over the border, we're the first ones they're going to see. Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. What was your job exactly? Like we know you were a grunt, but what did you do while you were there?
My job was we had a missile that could be fired 3,000 meters, and it was tracked by a wire, and so wherever your crosshairs were at, the missile would impact the same point because of that wire, and my job was to take out the tanks. And the main mission in Germany, it was called the General Defense Plan that was put in place after World War II, was done to reassure Germany that we weren't going to abandon them. People forget, we touch about it in history classes now, how bad Hitler was and all the things that he did that were horrible, but people don't realize how quickly Hitler moved across Europe and took over most of those countries. And so Germany was very fragile when we came in after the war, and to reassure them that nothing like that would happen again with the Soviets coming across and doing what Hitler did, our presence was there to stop them at the border. And my job was to take a defensive position in our assigned sector and shoot at the tanks as they came through the Fulda Gap, which is...
Okay, so I was going to ask you next, so about where are you in Germany to the Fulda Gap? Can you give us some sense of about where in Germany, what's the nearest big city, how far from the east-west border are you?
We were about an hour from the border.
And that's the Gap, actually. That's where they would come through.
There's a little town called Fulda that's just an hour east of Frankfurt.
Okay.
Frankfurt is was the capital of West Germany. Is it still the capital?
No.
It's Berlin again?
Yeah.
Okay. See there? I'm still thinking old West German and East German, but it's an hour east was a gap that the terrain was the most natural place for all of the mass armor that the Soviets had to come. If they were going to come into Europe, that was the only likely place that they could move that much equipment. And all the units stationed in Germany had assigned positions in West Germany on the border to slow them down or stop them coming through that gap. And we had a life expectancy of 2 days. We all knew that at the time that our job was to hold them long enough for the rest of the European countries to bring in and reinforce our positions, and for the troops in America to actually fly over. They had stockpiles of equipment in Germany so that the stateside troops just have to land and load up and replace us. But we weren't expected to live.
In a sense, you're the pawns. You're the first pieces that move out onto the board.
Yep.
And it's not that you're not important pieces, but you're pieces that are probably going to be sacrificed.
We're expendable pieces. Our job was just to get in the way and stop them.
So when you had alerts, that's something you talk about in the book a lot.
Yes.
You want to explain those a little bit? What they are?
During the time that when you were stationed in Germany during the Cold War, one thing you had to be ready for all the time, obviously, was an invasion of the Soviets. And so they kept us all on a short leash because of that constant threat that we really believed at some point the Soviets were going to attack. And so the alerts were put in place to make sure that within 4 hours, alert could be activated, and 90% of the troops could be back not only on base, but fully loaded in their vehicles, combat ready, to roll out and move to the Fulda Gap. And those were a nightmare because you never knew when they were coming. They always came in the middle of the night, and a lot of weekends.
Yeah, and you never knew. You assumed that most of them were training exercises, but you never knew for sure.
No, you didn't.
And can you talk about one or two times when an alert was sounded and you had a feeling that maybe it was more than just training?
For me, every soldier that was stationed over there, I've learned in the second book, has that this is it moment with an alert. Mine was when Reagan got shot. Back in the 80s, we didn't have all the fancy television. All we had is the Armed Forces Network, and they broadcast the news on one TV channel and one radio station. They've been around since, that's what you always heard in the Vietnam movies. So we didn't have a huge source of news, and we had an alert that morning. It was a standard load up, prepare to move out, and 4-hour alert. And I write about this sticking out because we screwed that one up. And if we weren't ready in 4 hours, life was made miserable for us by the commanders, because that's why we were there, and you just don't screw it up. And so after sitting in our vehicles for quite some time, we got out and we went and downloaded all of our equipment, and we just knew that we were in hot water. Well, then we heard that morning that Reagan had been shot, and we all knew that the Soviets were behind it. There was just no question in our mind that they were we didn't know anything about Hinckley or Brady or anybody.
Jody
We just,
Foster or
all
anything.
we knew, President Reagan had been shot, and it had to be the Soviets.
Yeah.
And then that evening we had a second alert, and that's the one that we all, it was just, there was a difference. It was quiet. We all just knew that they had proven the Soviets had done it, and we were going to go kick their butts for doing it. And turned out it wasn't, that was some idiot officer.
It makes me wonder if those in command knew that it wasn't the Soviets, but felt like they could still have taken the advantage of the opportunity. Surely they must have known immediately that he wasn't connected with the Soviets, but that doesn't necessarily mean that nothing was going to happen.
No.
Because when your leader shot, that other country could look at that and say, hey, this is our chance, they're down.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
And
I wonder what they were thinking, and I guess I'm sure it's on record out there somewhere, but
I guarantee you the Soviets were thinking, they're blaming us for this.
yeah.
Let's get
and
ready.
They may
And
attack us.
I bet if we had access to that somewhere, they probably were on high alert themselves.
Sure. It's certainly scary to think about how misunderstandings can come so close to,
Yeah.
because it's not like we're shooting each other with, 22 pistols here, right? We've got some weapons that that could end the world. And so you can't act too quickly.
No.
When you've got such powerful weapons at your disposal, for sure, on either side. So you would have to you'd have to take your position, and then once the alert was ended, or whether it was possibly the real thing or a drill, you would go back. And how often would you say these happen? When they
Monthly at a minimum, once a month.
It's like a fire drill only.
Yeah,
a little
you
more
just
intense.
didn't know when it was. Sometimes they would we deployed a lot. For a week to a couple times a year, we'd be gone for a month. And so sometimes they'd use the alert, and we'd know we were going to be deploying the following week to Grafenwehr, and they would alert us a day or two before we planned to go, and they would go ahead and move us to the training site.
So training is a big part of what you do there.
Yes.
And I know there was one particular event that was kind of a big deal. It was a yearly event. Was it the Reforger?
Reforger, yes.
Yeah, that's kind of it seems like it's a reoccurring theme in the book that those who were there, who participated in this, found it a very memorable experience. Can you tell us a little bit about it and what it was?
Yeah, it was actually one of the more cool things that we did. When I was there, we were pretty low tech. So we had orange and blue forces. And
what does Reforger stand for?
Reforger stands for Return of Forces to Germany. Okay. And it was designed again to reassure the Europeans and particularly Germany that should the Soviets cross the border, we could get there quickly. And so they rotated units in country to participate in the Reforger, but they also brought in other countries and units from stateside and did it in a real world scenario to show that they could make it there in a 48-hour window. And then the war games would begin. The unique thing about when I was there is that we didn't have a lot of freedom to be creative. The commanders didn't draw up the specific battle plans or scenarios. They were done by the top of the chain of command to simulate an assault if the Soviets crossed the border. And basically we were set against each other so that they could track and see the results of what that battle would mean if they did cross. In later years, the Reforger got to the point where they would allow both sides latitude to draw up their own scenarios and deploy, and gave them more freedom to move in the actual battles.
It's a big war game.
It's all it is.
Yeah. Now, is this something that still happens? Do we
No.
even have a presence in Germany? I mean, I assume we have some presence in Germany, but
Very small presence, although I've been hearing that and reading that there is quite a bit of talk of bringing us back over there. But most of the posts that were there have been wiped out and demolished since I was there.
Okay.
So
a lot of these places you talk about
are
gone.
Yeah.
Do they do these kinds of games in other parts of the world? I mean, I'm assuming we don't do too many war games in the Middle East where we're in active conflict. No. But are there places where we're still on guard and very alert, or is this something of the Cold War past? Kind of the show of force.
I'm pretty sure that there's still some Cobra Gold in Thailand still goes on. But I don't know of any, I haven't come across any exercises that are annual events like they used to be.
And did you do the Thailand?
I did it also.
Okay, I had forgotten about that. Tell us about that a little bit. This was after you leave Germany, right?
Yes. When I was stationed in Hawaii with the 25th Infantry Division, they had a different mission. That we were so far away and on the other side of the world that our mission was to go after and suppress scenarios like Vietnam from happening again, where communism would try to spread into other countries. And so we were more of a rapid deployment or a lightning. That was the 25th Infantry, that was the lightning division. But our job was to go in and stop it before it happened. And so that's kind of, the military evolved at that point to a lighter infantry. And we were more of the guinea pigs and some of the first units to go through the light infantry training. And Cobra Gold was an exercise to show how quickly other nations could converge into one area and suppress communism.
Okay. So you think that one is still?
I think they still do that because, yes.
Sure. Well, so we need to move on to some of the other stories that you tell about in your second book, but those jobs are, the stories are continue to be interesting because each guy, and in one case woman, has a little different job, and so you're telling their stories over a period of time, from the early '60s through the '80s, and they're the things they're doing. You know, one guy's in the kitchen, and one guy's, working on tanks and missiles, and we'll get into that stuff in a minute. So let's finish up your story very quickly, though. So your time in Germany's up, and then you have some time in Hawaii. Is that immediately after Germany?
No,
or?
I spent 2 years at Fort Knox.
Okay.
And Fort Knox, I went from being the frontline unit to the support unit. Fort Knox was the units that would come and have 48 hours to arrive and replace the guys in Germany. And then after 2 years there, I spent 3 years in the 25th Infantry Division in Hawaii before I got out.
Okay. And then not too much longer, you find your way to Bedford, and years later, now we're sitting here writing these books. There's a lot more we could talk about in your story. I want to remind everybody that this is your first book, We Were Soldiers Too, and this is what we've been discussing. And there's certainly, we don't want to give it all away anyway, right?
No.
There's a lot of information in here, a lot of Bob's experiences that we don't cover, or we haven't covered today. And I guess the only way you're going to be able to find those out is to check out his book. But we also want to have, and we only have about 20 minutes left. Let me see that book there, Bob. This is the sequel. I guess we can call it a sequel. And it's called We Were Soldiers Too, a historical look at Germany during the Cold War from the U.S. soldiers who served there. And we see got a similar kind of cover with the flag, but we've added a map. And this is not your story so much as it is stories of other, like I said, men and women who served during the Cold War. But starting in the early 1960s, your first story is quite a bit before your time.
Yes.
And so tell us, I want to get to maybe some of the events in the book or some of the characters in the book, but I want to first ask, how did this come about? I mean, it's you write a book, tell your own story, and that's certainly understandable. But why the second one when it's not your story?
The first book, when it was published, it's definitely for a specific market. It's not something that everyday people are going to pick up at the grocery store and want to flip through it. It's more towards people that have served in the military. That was the market I tried to go after, and so I was involved in a bunch of Facebook groups of Cold War veterans, and I let them know I'd written the book in case they'd like to read it. And the response was just overwhelming. I got so many messages and so many emails from these guys and ladies that, I felt the same way when my church asked me to stand up, and Oh, it brought back such memories of my time in Germany. You did a great job describing it. That it made me realize that there were a lot of other people who had stories that maybe I could write a follow-up book and tell stories of different people that served there over the different years and in different jobs. And so I put a feeler out asking on these Facebook groups if they would be interested, anybody be interested in participating. And I got such an overwhelming response that we did this book on, or I did this book on Germany, and then I'm going to do one on South Korea and a few others.
And we'll talk about those before we leave.
And before we leave this, I just want to, one thing that comes to mind is when you had first read it, you had asked me to put something in there about what a normal day was like, that you couldn't believe how physical everything was I was writing about. And
because it wore me out just to read it.
Yeah.
I can't do that.
And my response was that in the 80s, that was a physical, normal day.
It really did strike me. You know, I'm joking, let's say it's wearing me out holding my pen here, sitting in this chair too long. But the truth is, the things that you had to do on a daily basis, it almost felt like, and I'll say on the first reading, kind of before we had that conversation, it almost felt like, well, Bob's only really picking out the really kind of dramatic moments, that just these, you know, this run here or this mission here where they had to you know, go out in the middle of the night, and there's got to be like an average day. There's got to be a day where you just like had lunch and
went to the motor pool and
played poker like met Sergeant Bilko. And I'm sure there were days that were less intense, without a doubt.
Yeah.
But your point was really that every day was physical in some way. Yeah. Every day was intense in some way because of where you were and what you were doing.
Yeah.
And so maybe every day didn't have a 10 or 12 or 20 mile run
or
march, and not every day had an alert, but almost every day had something that was predicated on the idea that at any moment we could be at war with the East Germans and the Russians, and we better be ready for it.
Yeah.
And the only way to be ready for it, I tell my kids, if you don't read, and you don't do homework, are you going to be ready for the test? And they don't always understand that. But if I say, if you're on the football team and your coach never has practices, or you always leave practice going, yeah, that was pretty easy. How many games are you going to win?
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same philosophy here. If you had gone to Germany and just had free time, we're not going to be very prepared when the moment comes, if the moment comes. And so yeah, that's a great point to make. Yeah. And we see that in the stories of the other folks too. Really, the one that struck me. I mean, you can talk about. I want you to talk about any of these guys or lady that stand out to you. There's one in particular I want to talk about, but I first want to ask: were these folks you already knew?
No.
Did you just meet them through your
Facebook?
Through your Facebook groups? Yeah. Did you have anybody in there who was from your past?
I have one of my closest friends is a mechanic, and he was stationed with me in Germany, and his story's in here, Mike Arthur.
Okay. But everybody else was just
people I'd met and Facebook, volunteered to have their story told.
So how did you collect their stories? Do they just write something to you? Did you send them a list of questions?
I came up with 10 questions that were kind of to give me equal footing on everybody, a little bit of background, just basic stuff. When did you enlist? Where did you go to basic? Where were you stationed? What was the hardest thing you did when you were in Germany? What was the most memorable or funnest thing you did or coolest? Mm-hmm. And after I had all of that, I put them in chronological order, and then I set up phone interviews, and I had them call me. And my intent was to talk to them for 10 or 15 minutes with some questions, and I'd jot some notes down. But it turned out I spent an hour to 2 hours with every single one of them on the phone because we kind of clicked. I mean, we all lived the life. We all went through it. And so it's like we knew each other our whole lives, and the phone conversations just went on and on.
Sure.
And from that, I sat down and I wrote their stories.
Shared experiences are important, and I think sometimes in our culture where we have so much information at our fingertips and so many opportunities for television and music and so many possibilities for experiences that we often don't share things that we'd be used to. I mean, if Wizard of Oz came on the TV in the 70s, every kid at school watched Wizard of Oz because it was one of 3 things on, and it was the event of the year. And now, the kids in my class, their favorite bands are all, well, not all of them, but a lot of them. Some kid in West Virginia is making music in his garage, but puts it on Facebook, and nobody else knows it, and so we don't share quite as many things. But having those shared experiences, and I want to point out to people, if you're not already buying it as we speak, and probably people have already gotten on Amazon, one of the things Bob does in the second book is he weaves kind of the narrative of the Cold War into the stories of these men and I should say these soldiers who were serving. So you're going to get a lot of information about what was happening in the early 60s, what was happening in Cuba, what was happening with President Kennedy, what was happening with President Nixon at the start of Vietnam, what was the status of troops in Germany when, as you said, as Reagan got shot, or as other events unfold around the globe. So there's really you can't tell the stories, or I guess you could, but you choose to tell the stories of these soldiers in the context of what's happening in kind of current events during this Cold War period. So for those of you that are interested in just general history, or particularly Cold War history, this is pretty much a must read. So tell me, we don't have a lot of time left. What are some of the stories in this book that really stand out to you? What were some things that you found very meaningful, and we don't want to leave anybody out, but
No.
Just some things that you think are worth mentioning, maybe to entice people to pick up the book and read it.
I think each of them are interesting in their own, because they're so unique. I mean, there is the common thread of that we were all doing the same mission, but every story is worth reading because the Cold War, there was always something going on. And to give you an example, I guess, of some that stand out is during the fall, when the Shah of Iran fell, it was forced out, and the hostages were taken. As soon as Reagan, I forget how long they were in there, almost a year, they were held hostage.
Was it the 444 days?
Yeah.
It was a little over a year, I think.
And as soon as Reagan was sworn the oath of office, they were all released. And then there's a lot of speculation that Reagan scared a lot of people. But one of the cooks, or one of the people, Jerry Myers, that's in the book, was a cook. And the unit, the hostages were brought to Ramstein into this base, this hospital, so that they could get acclimated back to being free again and to be debriefed, because they were in captivity for a long time. Well, the unit that would have guarded the station was out on deployment for their training for the GDP mission, and so they brought all these cooks over from a neighboring base, and Jerry was one of them, had no idea why he was being ordered to guard this base, and they brought in these big floodlights, and then when these buses rolled in, it was immediately they knew what was going on. They brought the hostages in, and he was at the hospital that they were first treated at before they were flown home, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I gotta say, his chapter was the standout chapter for me. I think partly because of that story, partly because I think his job was very interesting too.
Yeah.
I don't know why I can cook a little. I'm not by any means saying I'm a cook, but the idea of cooking for the soldiers in that environment is appealing. Not the early morning hours that he had to keep, the very early morning hours, but I think, and he talks about making sure there's always coffee for the guys, making sure that anybody out on an exercise, during mealtime had a meal, making sure that soldiers who were there for holidays and their families were able to have a holiday meal. And I think, it really, to me, it epitomized the idea that, this is a very prevalent theme in the second book especially, every single job was important. It did not matter if you were in an office somewhere, far out of harm's way, or if you were, manning a tank, or if you were the guy cooking the food, then the whole machine couldn't run if you start taking those cogs out. And any one person, maybe if you don't have that one guy behind a desk somewhere, will probably be okay. But as a whole, these pieces work together.
Yeah.
And I think his chapter really illustrates that very, very well.
And a lot of the stories, I tried to emphasize the support side of it, because nothing could get done if the mechanics weren't present and the cooks weren't cooking the meals. The transportation guys. We even had the gentleman that was, you flew in, and it showed how low-tech things were, that they were on landlines trying to figure out
in the same building,
where
right?
you were. But that's how they assigned
That's
you.
great.
And so.
Yeah. Well, we've got to wrap things up, unfortunately. Do you have a list of the folks in the book? Is that what this is right here?
Yeah.
I'm looking at? Why don't you read their names and tell us, just tell us who they are. You don't have to give us a lot of information. Tell us the people you profile in this book.
Donald Bowman served in 60 to 63, so he was there during Kennedy's election and the critical stuff in Cuba, and he was a mechanic. Then Bob Duncan was in there next, and he served in communication. He laid the landlines and the satellites so that the units could communicate when they were deployed. John Littleton was a truck driver in 73 to 79, or he's 73 to 75. Frank Ferrioli worked in admin. He was one of the guys in an admin office and did the orders and staffing. Mike Davino, he was in Lance Missile. That was the, Lance missiles were the first nuclear-armed missiles in Europe and in Germany. And they're a medium-range missile, and we have a bunch of those. Those were the first things that got removed during the SALT treaties.
Okay.
Then Jerry was the cook. Juanita Coover is a fascinating story. I should have talked about. She's one of the
Well, they have to get the book to get all the details.
first women in a combat arms unit, and actually she should have never even been in a combat arms, because they found out a few years afterwards that they had some women over in Germany and they pulled them, but she was actually in a Lance missile unit herself. And this was just 2 years after the Women's Army Corps was dissolved, and a year after they started letting women even carry rifles.
And we're still having the debate. Whatever side people are on, I mean, that's been in the news in the last week.
Yeah.
Should we have women in these roles? So from her time of service to now, it's still a debate that is kind of raging in the military and in the
and it will always
civilian
rage
sector. Yeah.
And there are legitimate reasons on both sides.
Sure.
She was one of the first. George Condolis was a engineer, and he was an officer, so he gives us the officer's perspective, and we see what the engineers did in their jobs about blowing up bridges and building bridges. Mike Arthur was the mechanic that served there when I was there, and he's unique because he served 4 years. And one thing that stuck out was talking to Mike, because he was there 3 years after I was. 4 years is a long time to be in this environment. And Mike was admitted that he was very close to becoming an alcoholic, and he found softball as an outlet. And that kept his sanity. He stayed and got married. But 4 years in this life, I don't know how anybody could survive it. Then I've got Victor Whaley, that was a tanker. Jim Sfonen was worked on a howitzer, which is an indirect weapon. Randy Gann was a tanker. Dave Overman was a tanker. Patrick Schwartz is a medic who actually was on a range when some mortars blew up and treated some gentlemen, and there was a lot life lost there. Paul Batchelor was a scout and an anti-armor guy like me. Jim Hensley was an infantryman like myself, and Stanley Yorks was a medic, and he's my one guy that served in Berlin, behind the Berlin Wall. And so he tells that perspective of Germany.
And certainly all these chapters are interesting in their own right. And unfortunately, Bob we're going to have to wrap it up. We know a couple of things I want to hit before we go, though. This won't be the last book in the series.
No.
What's coming next? You're talking 3, 4, and 5.
I've got the third one I'm working on right now, and that's the guys that served in South Korea manning the DMZ, the demilitarization zone between North and South Korea. They work with live munitions all the time, and people don't realize that they were actually a lot of gunfights that went on during the Cold War in the DMZ. That will be followed up by We Were Soldiers 2, the Cold War at Sea, talking about the guys serving on the ships, because they had a lot of encounters with Soviet nuclear-armed subs and stuff, cat and mouse games. And then the fifth book is going to be a comparison of serving during the Cold War versus serving now on the War on Terror after we're out of country, but the war is still going on.
Okay. It's
kind of a comparison.
Okay. Sure. So we're looking at these over the next couple of years, one at a time, as you get information. We want to let everybody know, if you're watching this, we're recording in early February 2016, but this will be available on Vimeo. One of the things we'll do is make sure you get the link for that, so you can pop it up on your Facebook page and let all these folks know that we talked about them a little bit here on this episode. What do people want to buy the books?
You can get on Amazon and get the e-books very, very cheap. The book on my career is only $2.99 for the e-book, and for the next until the first week in March, the new book is only 99 cents.
So what are we looking at for a hard copy?
And then paperbacks, this one's, Amazon's marked it down 30%, so it's $7.66 for the new book. And then my original book, my story, is $9.99.
Okay, and shameless plug, we do have a few copies with the original cover available at Inklings at 1020 16th Street.
Autographed copies.
Autographed copies, absolutely. So if you head down there Wednesday through Saturday, 12 to 7, then you can pick up a copy for the same price that it's on Amazon. But certainly check these out. Bob's story is compelling, and I think we both improved a little bit on the second one.
Yes.
I think I was going to suggest that we go back into the first one and maybe do one more cleanup, and I think it'll stand up to the second one a little better at some point. I think we got better when we did it a second time.
I think, and we should, when we say we, Brian has been my editor for this series.
So we're both learning as we go.
So this is a project, and the second book actually is the #1 book under Cold War on Amazon right now, and it's #3 on the new book list in the category of military history. So it's doing really well.
So help Bob get those numbers up and sell a few copies. And you know, maybe you'll make some money off this, maybe you won't, but I don't think that's why you're doing it.
No, I'm doing it to tell the story. There's a story.
Yeah.
People need to know about the Cold War.
Yeah. Of course, we would love to see you make some money from this. You put a great deal of time into it, and a lot of your heart, and certainly you're honoring your own service, but also the service of the people who were there at the same time, or shared those experiences with you, even if it was a little bit before or a little bit after. Well, we're going to have to wrap up. Bob, we thank you for being here today. We appreciate you coming in very much. And I can already see that we're going to need to have you back when that third book comes out, and we'll just continue to follow up. I think we could probably come back to these first two books and revisit them a little bit when the Korea book comes out. And I think there are things that we needed to touch on today, but we didn't really have time for. There's just too much information. So just go ahead and mark your calendar and plan on coming back with us when
I look forward to
when that third book is out, and then 4 and 5 as well. Guys, check them out. We Were Soldiers 2, and We Were Soldiers 2. Look at Germany, and you can get them on Amazon. You can get them in Inklings. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, for being here today. We'll see you next time.